Hi David, it's Tess. I know that you haven't really responded much to my videos before, and I suppose I have been very denigrating towards your religion, and I'm sorry for that if you feel that way, but I'm only trying to voice my views on things. And it is stipulated in the Ten Commandments, one of the very early commandments. I mean, I can't say if it's the first, second or third, but it's within the first three, is that thou shalt have no God before me. No God before me. You shall worship no icons, is also in the first three. Yet, we have Christians worshipping Jesus, and Jesus supposedly even saying that you cannot come to the Father, that is God himself, except through me. Now, I believe God did say he was a jealous God, and thou shalt have no gods or icons before me. You should worship God. So why do Christians worship Jesus? Isn't that definitely against God's will? God tells you to worship no one before him, no icons, no other. You should worship God. Even if you say, well, Jesus is God, so why don't you just say, well, I worship God? Why do you say that I worship Jesus and Jesus brings me to God? God told you, worship no one before him. You can't get to God through Jesus. God told you, you can only get to him through him. So Jesus is a step that is unnecessary. Just like when a lot of atheists say, well, the universe existed, before time and existed after time. And people say, no, God made the universe. Well, why would we need a God to make the universe when the universe makes itself? And Christians say, no, the universe needs a creator. But God doesn't need a creator. They try to avoid that, perpetual, going back, something made it, you know what I mean? This is what God and the people who worship God, the Jews, the original Jews who wrote the Bible, they put down. You can only worship the one God. There is only one God. There's not a triceptor. There's not a God, a Son and a Holy Ghost. There is God. So how do you get around this idea of worshipping Jesus when you're told in the most earliest books of the Bible there is only one God? You need no one to get to God through. You worship God. You can't worship another to get to God. Jesus is actually a fake God in that sense. And to worship him, in order to think you can get to God through him, well, it's a bit of a fake, isn't it? And how do you answer that, David? This idea that Jesus is a part of God, is God, you get to God through him, and yet God himself in the Ten Commandments says, worship no other God than me. Worship no idols. Because Jesus is an idol, the cross is an idol. How do you get to God through that fake God, Jesus, and that fake symbol, the cross? How do you get to God through that when God specifically says, no idols, no other God than me? He doesn't mention the ghost. He doesn't mention Jesus' son. He says there's only me, one God. You worship me or you worship none. You worship false gods if you don't worship me. So how can you clarify that? How do you distinguish that from you're just a cult who worship something that some people said 2,000 years ago and dragged people away from the true religion, the Judea religion, of worshipping one God. Now the Catholics have three. You might even say 4 or hundreds, depending if you worship the saints as well. But then you've got Mary Magdalene, or Mary, you know what I mean, the Virgin, you know, Jesus' mother. You know, the Catholics worship Mary as well. That's a false idol, if ever I've seen one. You probably agree with that, being a Christian who only, you know, on the present side worships God. But you worship Jesus, false idol. God doesn't mention Jesus in the Judeo-Christian, well, in the Judeo religion. Christians invented Christ, and they pushed him between the people and God. For what reason? I would ask you. For what reason would God need to have a son come to earth, when all he asks is that you believe in him and worship him? That's always been the tenet of the religious. One God, worship that God, and he will exist and answer your prayers and do for you. Why would you have to have Mary and Jesus and 12 disciples and saints and bones and bits of wood to worship, and you know, certain places on the earth you had to visit, like the Muslims going to Mecca. Even Mecca itself is a symbol, it's an emblem. Jerusalem, to go to Jerusalem, the place of Christ's supposed death, you're actually going and worshipping at the altar of an image. God said, no images before me. So how do you parse these, well, as far as I can see, you know, they're very, very hard to describe as religious attributes. They are fake. Even if Jesus existed as a person, it's a fake God. Only God is God. You should only worship God. That's what God said in the 10 Commandments. Worship no God before me. Yet Jesus says you can only get to God through him. I would imagine that to me speaks of someone trying to intercede, trying to put themselves between me and God. And isn't that exactly what the devil would do, you know? So how do you know that Jesus wasn't a plant of the devil, and that you've been suckered into believing in something which God didn't want you? He plainly states, no God before me, no images. In fact, the Muslims, 500 years after Christ, although they recognise Jesus, as you say, as a prophet, they say he wasn't God's son. He was a prophet, like many people of the time. They also say Muhammad was a prophet and not God's son, and there is only God. Allah, they call him. We call him God. I'm sure the Jews have a different name for him. I don't know what the Jewish name for Jehovah, I think it is. Yeah, right. So they have their name, you know. So there is one God. If we look back in time and look at all these things and sort it out, and if we believe what God said in 10 Commandments, worship no God before me, you can change my name but you can only worship me. The Muslims worship Allah, one God, the Jews worship Jehovah, one God, and the Christians worship God. You don't really have a better name for them when you say God, the thing, the chair, you know what I mean, the cup, you know what I mean, the God, you know what I mean. We don't give him a name, except when we turn around and say, well, his name is Jesus. And Jesus has a mother. Oh, she's a virgin mother, but she's a mother, another icon to worship. You might not worship it, but many supposed Christians do. The Catholic Christians, they worship, you know, the Madonna, and they worship many other saints. I mean, you've talked of many of them: Paul, Andrew, James, after my own namesake, John. There's many saints, I mean, but they are false images, icons. God warns you about worshipping icons. He warns you about worshipping anything other than Him. He said, worship only me. So how do you get over that, David? This idea that Jesus is part of God. God never mentioned anywhere in any of the teachings of the Hebrew scriptures that He was ever going to send down part of Himself. He never promised to come down, and these are things men have written. If you look at anything that's actually supposedly the Word of God and not the interpretation of people writing about God, if you actually look at the words of God, He speaks very little about anything other than being God and demanding your worship, and for your worship saving you, or not even saving you, but for your worship creating you, which He's already done if you're worshipping Him. You know what I mean? So where is the worship of God necessary? Where is God even demanded the worship? He's asked for it. He's tested people, but He's never really demanded, as far as I am aware of the Bible, He's never demanded you worship Him. What He has demanded is you don't worship others. He's a jealous God, but He believes that if you don't worship others, the only thing left is Him. That's what I take from the Bible. Just wondering, I might be wrong in some of these steps. I'm not a theologian. I'm not a theologian. I don't believe you are either, but you've probably read the Bible as much as I have. Which I have. I've read the Bible. Read several. Well, I've read parts of several different Bibles. The parts that were very interesting, and the parts that are very interesting are the beginning parts. The parts where the understanding between God and us is set out, which are the very early parts. All the other parts at the end of the Bible are all to do with other people who are interpreting what they think should be our understanding of our relationship with God. It's the very beginning of the book. That's where we actually see it's supposed to be God speaking through people. At the end, it's more people having crazy imaginative dreams and saying they think God was speaking through them, and that's what I'm trying to get to. How do you know Paul was actually, he was speaking for God? God was speaking through. How do you know that when almost everything he says contradicts loads of what was said by God before through people previous who were more in touch with God? The people who are actually there and seen the miracles of God don't say the things that Paul says, and Paul was never there to see those miracles. He only heard about them. So why do you think you should believe Paul and not the people who were actually supposedly there to see the miracles of God? The people who were there to see the plague put on Egypt. So, who's the true speakers in the Bible? The Old Testament, who were there when God was actually performing miracles on the land? Or the New Testament, written by people who were around maybe 12 or 30 or 70 years after any miracle was ever performed. I wonder, if these events happened today and we didn't have cameras, who would you believe? The people who were there and actually seen the miracle, or the people who were told about the miracle by other people and then wrote it down later? I'm just wondering, David, you know, why do you think the New Testament has any real purpose other than detracting believers from the Old Testament book? The book supposedly written, really written by God, not by people who talk to people who talk to God. Anyway, Swanjiva, and I'm not a hater of religion. I believe some people need religion. I'm just a hater of people saying that religion is so important that we should all believe it. There's no real evidence for any of it. It's down to belief. You know that, it's down to belief. You choose to believe. I'm wholly on board with that, but I choose not to believe. And if you ever turn around and say I'm damn tail because I don't, then you're no better off than the people in America who are saying that all American soldiers are fags. You know, and I'm sure you don't agree with that. I don't know what skill you've had, but I'm sure you don't believe the world is only 6,000 years old. Well, maybe 10. I'm sure you don't believe that. I'm sure you don't believe a man lived inside a giant fish. For days and days and days, because obviously a fish's stomach is probably bigger than a whale's stomach, and there's probably a house in there with a fridge and food and gas cooker, I'm sure, you know, which enabled him to live there. And I'm sure when he turned the gas cooker on, it built up a bit of heat and it made the fish spit him out, which is why he survived. Sure, there were talking donkeys, you know, 2,000, 3,000 years ago. I'm sure there were talking donkeys. I'm sure there was a talking snake 10,000 years ago, you know. And I'm sure that Adam and Eve weren't Adam and Steve, and they populated the whole world without any genetic disformation, and that's why today it's perfectly okay for you to have sex with your sister and not worry about genetic malformation. All that genetic stuff is all wrong, isn't it? Yeah. Just saying, rationally, none of it makes sense, David. None of it. But you're welcome to believe if it makes your life better. I just don't think that we should be allowing people to put this sort of thing into schools where it's sort of, you know, every 5-year-old child needs to hear this stuff, and by the time they're 12-year-old think that it's true when it's not true. I didn't have much of a difficult period in my life not believing it. As I say, between 5 and 8. I don't know, maybe smarter than most of the kids around about me. I just didn't believe it, just didn't make sense. And that's why I was better at math and physics and you know, the sciences. And you seem sensible, rational. You know, you work with computers. You don't believe computers are magic, do you? And that God set up some kind of wave form in the electromagnetic sort of, you know, firmament that works just for computers and mobile phones? Or do you believe the scientists are right with how the you understand the world. But maybe only just on mobile phones, but not on the understanding of the psychology of human beings. Oh, that's all funk, is it? Caves in the dark and fires, torches to keep the dark and horrible forest creatures and spirits away. You know, yeah. Anyway, David, I continue to watch your stuff because I think it's interesting. I prefer more your video gaming stuff, but if you want to go into your religion, I'm happy to go down that rabbit hole. I hope you don't block me for anything, because I'm not trying to denigrate you. I wholeheartedly believe that there is some people who need religion. There is some people who really, really need religion because it's what makes them fit people to live in society. What I don't believe is that we all need to believe what they believe in order to be good citizens. I believe we can all find our own level within society and be good citizens to each other. And I would never turn around and say to a neighbour, I'm not going to help you because I thought that their religious views were different from mine. And I would never turn around even and say to a person next door to me that I'm not going to help you because you're of a lower education standard than me. These sort of things don't enter my mind. If I have a neighbour who needs help, I don't care their religious background, their educational background, the reason why they get into the problems they're in. They're my neighbour. Whatever happens to them infringes upon me, and I feel that I have the what would you say? It's part of my personhood, part of my citizenhood to help my neighbour. You know what I mean? I shouldn't be judging them. I may laugh at them on the weekends when I'm drunk, but when they turn around to me on Monday and say, I'm having problems, can you help me out? I'll be, if they need help with their garden, weeding, they need help they've got a flood, they need help saving and cleaning down the stuff so they don't have to throw it away. I will help them, I'll give them water, you know what I mean, all that. I will go through and help them wash their stuff. I will help them. That's part of me as a human being. They're human beings. They're my neighbour, for fuck's sake, you know. I may use it as an anecdote. The stupid guy next door didn't know how to do something, blah blah blah. Maybe it was because he was Christian, maybe it was because he was Greek, maybe it was because he was African, maybe it was because he was a stupid Scots. But you know what I mean? It's like, yeah. But that's a human thing to try and find these reasons for stuff. Doesn't mean they're true. It's just the things that humans do. And that's why I don't think that the reason for my life being good, bad or indifferent is anything to do with me not believing in God. Or why your life is good, bad or indifferent is anything to do with you believing in God. Those sort of things, they're personal things that really don't have a huge effect upon your life. Really. They don't. You know, I mean, if a plane falls out of the sky and falls in your house, the fact you're a Christian is not going to save your house. Your house is still going to get crushed. What could matter is the fact that, oh, I was a Christian and it happened to be, it was a Sunday and I was at church and I wasn't in the house, therefore I didn't die. If that had been Monday, I'd have been sitting on my computer and that plane would have crushed me to death. That doesn't mean to say that God saved you. It's just the routine of your life that saved you. You know what I mean? You could also have been an atheist and on Sunday you were away playing darts. You know what I mean? In some dart club or snooker, and some snooker play, drinking alcohol in a pub somewhere playing snooker that saved you. So there's all these reasons why the plane wouldn't have killed you if it fell in your house. Doesn't mean that God saved you. You know what I mean? And this is what I'm saying. There's lots of reasons for the things that happen in life. But please look into that. The first 3 commandments, 2 of them are out of the first 3, I think 2 of them are: don't worship any god before me, and what was that? Don't worship idols. I think that's 2 of the first 3. And I'm just going from memory here. I haven't been to Sunday school since I was like 8, you know what I mean? I'm 51 now, so I'm going query from memory, David, but I don't believe a lot of this, and that's it. Why should belief be more important than knowing a thing? I mean, if your car breaks down, do you go into your Bible and say, right, so if I open any random page, it's going to tell me what's wrong with the car? No, you don't. If you get any understanding of a combustion engine, you probably know a little bit from the sound and from what the lights in the car and from what the engine's saying. You know, you'll probably know a little bit about it. Oh, it's the solenoid, or, you know, if you've got that now. I don't think cars have solenoids. I'm a bit out there, you know. Or it's the pump, you know, the fuel pump, or it's the carburetor, you know, and all this. You have an idea, you know what I mean. You don't go into your book and flip through the Bible and go open any page and then read a passage. That's what's wrong with the engine, because it wouldn't make any fucking sense to do that. Sorry for the language, but it wouldn't make any sense to do that, David. Right? So why, when something happens in your life, do you go to the Bible and flip through it and open it a page and say, that's what's wrong with my life. I didn't kill a goat and open its spleen and look to the sky and chant and then burn it on a fire. That's probably, you know, or maybe it's the next passage. You know, I didn't sacrifice a virgin last month. You know, I don't know if those things in the Bible, they probably aren't. I'm thinking probably some of the Bible it says that shit. But I'm just saying, David, you know, the sacrificing and the bloodletting and the burning of flesh, you know what I mean, it's in the Bible somewhere, you know what I mean. it just might not have anything to do with my car breaking down. No, if my car breaks down, I get on my mobile phone, which again you'll find nowhere mentioned in the Bible, you know what I mean. You call it the AA or the RAC or some other, you know, national insurance company to come and help me get my car started. You will even do that. In fact, you have a computer. If your computer breaks down, do you immediately think, I've got to pray? I've got to get my Bible out and pray to fix my computer? Or do you think, God, shit, something's went wrong, everything else is working, but the computer's not working. I think maybe I should take it to a computer shop and get them to look over it. Or have you got enough knowledge like me to actually go through each component and say, there's the bit that's not working, I've only got to take that bit and test it, you know what I mean, and then find out if I need to replace it or not. Do you, you know what I mean? If that, this is what I'm saying, you know. And you don't go into your Bible and flip through, you know, I'll just open it, just spread the Bible and flip through the pages and then just put my finger on it, and that passage is going to tell me how to fix my Bible, how to fix my computer. No, you know that's not going to work. Do you believe that getting on your knees and praying for God to tell you what's wrong with your computer, do you think that's going to work? No, you don't think that's going to work, and you don't do it. You don't do it. So why do you think you should do that in any other aspect of your life? When you're out of work, which I know you have been, and I have been as well, do you get on your knees and pray for a letter to come through the door to offer you a job? Or do you go and apply for lots of jobs, hoping to get that interview? Because you know, like me, you know, if you get the interview stage and you can present yourself to that person who hires, you know you can be the most, you know, sort of employable person they've ever met, because you know that if you can get that interview and let them hear you speak about the knowledge you have about, you know, the subject matter of the company and blah blah blah, you know they'll hire you because you've done the work, you know. Or do you pray to God, you know, please, I've never filled an application, I'm just hoping that someday down the road God's just going to put it in their mind to write me a letter saying we want to employ you, come for an interview. No, you don't do that. You don't sit in your house praying hour after hour, day after day. No, you do the work. You fill in application forms. You send those forms off. You know what I mean? You even deliver them by hand sometimes if they're close by to make sure they get it. You know, like I did. And I'm an atheist. I did all that stuff to get employed. You did the same thing. Or you talk to people in your church. Yeah. Social networking. I've done that and I'm an atheist. You don't have to be in a church to know people that can get you a job. You know. So please don't tell me that God helps you more than it helps atheists. But please answer me. God says, worship no other God before me. Worship no icons. What is Jesus if he isn't a step between you and God? Just ask him. You know. Any literature you have with photographs of Jesus in it, that photograph, that cross that you may wear around your neck, is that not an icon? I do believe a cross is an icon, and God says worshipping icons, having icons, tattooing your body, all bad things. All bad things. And I know lots of evangelical Christians with tattoos of crosses and stuff on them. Yeah. You might say, well, I don't have any tattoos. Do you have a cross that you wear around? Do you have a cross anywhere in your house? Do you have symbols anywhere to do with religion? Because that's symbolism. God tells you to avoid symbolism. Symbols are icons, David. You know. Jesus is an icon. The image of him in your mind is an icon. You should be thinking of God, not Jesus. And yet Jesus is a step between you and God. Why do you accept that when God tells you not to? As long as you've had, Dave.